Well, welcome. This is the Freehold Roundtable once again. This is the third anthology, the second directly in the universe. We're going to go through all the authors here and talk about their stories, if they wish, and how they became involved in the project, and what it was like working with a jerk like me. So Defiance is the same time frame as Resistance, but it has a less complicated, less interactive timeline. They're simply standalone stories progressing through the war from both UN and Freehold points of view. So we start off with Jaime Ibson doing the story I wanted originally, which is the ground's eye view of the attack in progress. Go ahead, Jaime, and introduce yourself.
So, I'm Jaime Ibson, token Canuck. I had one story in Freehold Resistance, and then Mike and I were talking at it was actually at Pensick 2 summers ago about this other story that we were missing, and so I put together a broader skill set, which is the opening story in the anthology. When you read The Weapon, there's a scene where Ken is recruiting for the Earth mission. And there's one guy who turns him down. And I found that character to be a really interesting character. And so I ran it by Mike that, well, what if we took his story? And, you know, if he didn't go on the Earth mission, then he would have still been on Grania when the UN showed up. And so that's where I started, was he comes home. In The Weapon, he had chosen his family over going on the mission. He was explicit that like his family's important to him, and if he could get like some kind of a hint, then maybe. And Ken's like, I can't. And so Cecil turns him down. And so then my story opens with Cecil coming home, a little bit disquieted by this pitch that he got from this spook type. And then we jump forward, and he's almost hit retirement age, but now there's the malcontents from Earth that have been dumped onto Grania, and he and his Blazer team are dealing with the riots. And then finally he's retired and he's going to go work for city safety. And then he's dealing with a car crash when he's like up on a hill. He's able to see the kinetic strike come in and plaster Heilbronn base, and the fight goes from there. In The Weapon, Mike had written that Cecil was like a fabrication expert, that he's the guy who can make whatever you need. And that's why he was really useful for the Earth mission. And so we got to talking about that, and then there's like 2-3 paragraphs where they discuss the initial resistance in Jefferson, where they're just being absolutely savage to the invaders, and you know, anything that they can think of, you know, bogus landmines that are scattered with the occasional live one mixed in. Even something as simple as pulling up sewer access covers. Well, now every road is a potential hazard and that kind of thing. And it just works through to there until you know, the initial resistance is starting to flag, and then it's time for him to get out of town and continue his fight elsewhere. So I had a lot of fun with it. I had a lot of fun talking over some of the ideas with Mike at Pensick. We were giggling when we came up with the Frisbee idea. Yeah, it went from there. It was a great time.
I like how you picked up well on the free market aspect of the fire department is a pay-as-you-go, and well, if you want to want us to put out your burning bridge, you've got to establish that, you know, you actually have a contract with us, because you're claiming to be the government now. While the bridge is sitting there dropping bits of you know, polycrete. Jonathan Green here?
He's not.
He's not. Okay, well, he was next. He also had a lot of fun. It's a civil service ship, you know, paramilitary, out doing inspections of the habitats. And in blunt language, one of these habitats decides on some fuck games. They pick a dozen different personas. One of them is mining control. One of them is some rebel group favorable to the UN. One's a hardcore resistance group. One is a fluffy new age crystal church. And they're all on the radio all giving their points of view. And every few hours, they change allegiances amongst themselves. And so the people on this ship have no idea what's going on. Well, bring your ship in this way. No, don't take those orders. You need to bring it over here. Well, no, the dock's over here. Who told you to do that? And lead them on a goose chase, and then there's some sabotage. It was a tremendous read. He's been a fan for a long time. I was actually kind of enthused to find out. Well, we'd never corresponded. We met up at a convention, and he's a well-established professional. I was like, wow, oh yeah, I love your stuff. It's like, well, sweet. So I brought him into this. Who was the third story? I should have brought a copy down with me.
That was Kevin and I.
Yes. And they took an out system, which was really cool. Go ahead.
So I had the opportunity to work with this unknown writer, very up and coming, named Kevin J. Anderson. And, I guess Mike had approached Kevin to write the story, and then Kevin and I had just finished writing a story for one of Chris Kennedy's anthologies, and Kevin said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And I said, "Absolutely, let's do it." So when we got the Bible information, it was kind of funny that Kevin and I were both leaning towards trying to tell a story that was off Grania, so that's what we ended up doing. We go to the planet Meiji, which is paradise in Japanese, so that's why our story is titled Trouble in Paradise. And it deals with a blazer named Elwood who is stuck there. He's trying to get home. His father is dying of some type of terminal disease, and all he needs to do is try to get home. And in the process of trying to jump on a freighter illicitly, he comes across a child in the stacks of containers at the airfield, and ends up following the child and discovering that the child is one of hundreds of kids that are being held by the UN. And he doesn't understand why, but he feels compelled that he needs to help. And his assistance comes from a couple of local insurgents, but then also from the shipping heiress of the Japanese company who is married to the UN commander there on the planet. And the story kind of unfolds from there, where these two different sources come together and end up rescuing these kids and getting them back to their families to kind of thwart the UN's effort to hold them over their heads and kind of forced labor. And it was just a fun story for us to construct and build out one of Mike's planned planets and kind of go from there.
I like the fact that we see the repercussions of the war in other systems that are not directly involved. There's political ramifications, there's economic footprint, and this has a much broader scope. And a couple of these stories really flesh that out, which I think is really cool. Who is next?
You. Humans Call It Duty.
Okay, yeah, that's what I wrote a long time ago. I was trying to get, actually, it's one of the ones I was trying to get published. I was sending out short stories. I was getting rejections. And that one came back from one anthology, which was government supported in Australia. And this is a simple tale of revenge and killing and isn't science fiction. Like, well, the point of view character isn't human, so there's that to start with. And then Joe Haldeman was doing a Future Weapons of War anthology. And I said, well, I've got this one where the weapon is actually an animal. It's a combat leopard. And they said, oh, that sounds good. Go ahead and send it to us. And so Joe Haldeman thought it was good enough. So I think it works with that. I'm definitely a better writer now, but I had a lot of fun with it. It's loosely based on the Rudraprayag leopard in India. This was a leopard that over the course of about a year had a confirmed body count of like 350. It was a sociopathic leopard. It would kill people, it would kill cows, it would kill dogs, it would kill chickens. As kids walking home from school, one disappears and nobody knows what happened. And right at the end, Colonel Corbett, who's a fairly well-known historical figure in hunting, had set up a blind, had set up a bear trap, hair triggered like you see in the cartoons, had baited it with a body with wires to set guns, and the body had cyanide capsules stuffed into it. This is documented. So the leopard showed up at night, rolled the body over to take the tension off the wires, ate several chunks of it, but not the parts with the cyanide, and then set off the trap on the way out without getting caught. He fired off one shot and missed. And I'm thinking at this point, I declare the leopard the winner because he's coming back the next night with lockpicks. Like, dude, you shot at me. But they eventually managed to kill it. But this thing was insanely intelligent and vicious. And leopards are very highly intelligent animals. And it's like, so there's always working dogs. The military's used them for a long time. And you hear a dog. And there's always someone who goes, "Oh, nice doggy." And I say, when a leopard goes, it's going to eat your face. There's no nice kitty. It's like, no, that's a bad sound. And of course, Jaime ran with the leopards in the last anthology. They're kind of iconic to the universe at this point. And after that,
Solitude by Jess.
So hi guys. Don't know what. There it is.
Hi, Jess.
Hello.
Okay. So, yeah, my story in this one, Solitude, was not planned. And door keeps opening. It was not planned, and I wasn't actually expecting to have anything written. And we got talking, and Mike mentioned he wanted something about space stations, which I'd had something kind of on a space station concept. And I decided that I should go ahead and try to write it. And it's really, some people would just like to be left alone. It's pretty much what the story is about, is being left alone completely. And I know some of the people who've read it already are rather fond of the ending. Everyone's had that person they want to do that to. But pretty much it.
what was after Solitude?
Province of Man.
Usually
that-
Dimension. Never mind. Sorry.
Yeah, that would be me.
so real quick before that, Jaime and Justin sent in almost parallel stories. It's similar events in different units with different points of view, and it's a beautiful comparison between a strong unit and a failing unit, and strong characters and weak characters. It was wonderful.
Thank you. And I agree. Jamie's was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I agree. Well, I mean, I agree that yours is really good too. So I wanted to go the dark route, and I think I succeeded there. And really, I just wanted to follow one UN lieutenant's journey in trying to not be a shitbag. Every odd is against him, and he has to decide: do I fall in line? Do I shut up in color and make it through this, or do I stick to my guns and be the person I am supposed to be? So, and that's really the journey of the story.
Yeah, for mine, I mean, first of all, I was in the previous anthology with the same unit, so there was some setup there. And that one was probably a little more lighthearted. I mean, there was still action, there was still death, but it is essentially the same good infantry battalion. By good, I mean the officers in the NCO still care about things like the laws of war, their honor of their regiment, basic human decency. They're not soft. They'll go into combat, they'll kill insurgents all day long, but they really are not butchers at this point. But they're also trying to avoid the inevitable clusterfuck of UN high command micromanaging them. So the crux of the first story, and I don't think this is giving anything away, is them fooling or trying to fool the Inspector General about what's going on in their battle space. And there's a little bit of Rube Goldberg to it. Again, there is still weight to it. There's still gravity. It's not really a comedy, but there definitely, I think there's some definite humorous aspects to it that land.
We like that character.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it was,
So
yeah.
we stole her and used her in a few things also. So we liked the IG a lot.
Yeah, and she shows up for a little bit in this one too, just a little bit in the second story. So one of the things that happens, it's not a spoiler, happens at the very opening of my first story is a UN platoon leader gets blown away by Grania Grania rebels. And one of the main characters of the story is the platoon sergeant from that point forward. This story, that platoon sergeant gets a new platoon leader and a bunch of replacements from other units that don't have the same standards and discipline. And this story, again, I tried to incorporate, I was in the Army for 10 years. I deployed to Iraq twice, Afghanistan once. And one of the things I always try to communicate is just the absurdity and the humor of that life on deployment. I mean, it's also frustrating, sometimes terrifying, often boring, but it's also hilarious. In my experience, like being deployed is a hilarious experience. So I do try to infuse humor, and even in very dark stories. But this one takes a much darker turn because if you consider what it is to be a good officer or a good non-commissioned officer in, say, the Imperial Japanese Army or the Soviet Army or the Wehrmacht, like being even a collection of good NCOs and officers, because there are units from all of those armies that have brutal reputations as a whole, but there are units with clean records. So that's what this story is about. And without giving too much away, it's even that good unit gets into situations where there is no fully principled answer. And what is this experienced, battle-hardened NCO and this young, idealistic lieutenant? What conclusions do they come to? How do they make it work when nothing works? So very much like Jamie's, that Mike is absolutely right. They are very, very well paired. That's where I'm going with this story. And if I come back to write a third story someday, it'll probably be even darker, which is a shame because I've grown to love these characters. They're not based on any one individual. I can't point at, oh, well, that sergeant was my first sergeant from my second deployment, and that captain I knew. No, but they are all still very much in spirit people I served with. Not specifically, but their essence put into fiction as best I can with my very rookie abilities.
And there was no planning there. They both sent in these stories, and I'm going, boy, these are very... No, these stories are great. This is perfect. Yeah, I was active duty, Air Force, Army Guard, Air Guard, Army Guard again, Air Guard again. Basically, whenever someone had a promotion slot, and I was in units where the unit was a phenomenal functioning unit, and the command changed, and it became either less so or a complete dump. And then there was times when I was in a unit that was just sort of trickling along, doing what it could. A competent leader came in and the unit suddenly shaped up. I mean, there is a huge amount of personality footprint from the commander to the unit if they know what they're doing, for good or bad.
Really funny,
Absolutely.
what's really funny, Mike, is I've seen units where like it's the first sergeant, the supply sergeant, and one of the lieutenants, and somehow with a non-present commander or just a bad commander, they still manage to make it.
Yeah, well, what's also interesting too is that both you guys brought up Mike, and then Jamie brought it up in her story, was how much it's a different thing even with the Guard and Reserve, especially when you add that layer in of full timers in a unit versus guys that are drill status.
Yeah, my last deployed unit was some active duty. This is an Air Force engineer unit. Some active duty, New Jersey Air Guard, Salt Lake City Air Guard, the Mormons, Guam Air Guard, Puerto Rico Air Guard, and I was the token guy from the Midwest. Yeah, I was literally the only one. It was so you get a huge clash of cultures there, which can be a lot of fun, but it also means there's communication issues. And those stories are separated. There's others in between. So who was after Jamie?
I was back again with the one that I had for Resistance.
Yes. Go ahead.
So the strongest link was actually written for Freehold Resistance. But in the interest of saving word count and space, it got bumped, and I was thrilled when it turned out that it would have a slot here, because it was written kind of like as a nucleus story where a lot of different moving parts from Resistance kind of came together. In Freehold, there's Minstrel, this random farmer-looking dude who shows up and starts dropping off all of the vital supplies that Kendra in particular needs. And he never gives his name, and keeps everything on the down low. And there's this tragic moment in it where the UN has deployed this horrific bioweapon, and the little girl at the farm has died as a result of exposure to it. And Minstrel shows up with the counter nano that will help them overcome the effects. And so the story that I put together was, well, how did he come to be in possession of the counter nano itself? It started launching from John's story, where the corrupt sergeant major ends up getting a sample of the incoming nano into Minstrel's hands, because Minstrel's kind of working the area, he's making contacts, he's playing both sides, he's getting to know everybody. Once he realizes what he's got, he reaches out to Jessica's hackers to say, hey, look, I've got something, I think it's a really big deal. I don't know anybody that could take a look at this. Who do you got? And so they point Minstrel at a biologist working at the university. At first, she doesn't really want anything to do with it. She doesn't trust him. Nobody trusts anybody at this point. There's a bit that touches on my cats, in that Minstrel ends up having an old girlfriend who knows the scientist, and then they get like a proper introduction, and okay, we're all on the same team, we're good, let's figure this out. And the problem is that the UN's got a little bit of mad science stuff going on. They have broken what they know about biology in order to embed a lethal virus inside this non-lethal irritant. And there's a clock that's ticking, and nobody knows that it's ticking. Everybody's just like got this miserable, like poison ivy from hell kind of an effect. But then Massa's story comes along, Mike Massa's story, where the retirees in the secluded mountaintop retirement villa, who actually are all like ex-special forces badasses, they managed to get the data and dump it out onto the net so that anybody who can see it can find it, they can use it. And that's the key that they need in order to unlock the cure. So then Strongest Link finishes with that scene where Minstrel delivers the counter nano to Kendra, but it's from Minstrel's perspective. And I thought that was pretty awesome of Mike to let me actually bring her into the story and tie it directly into Freehold, because that was a big deal for me. So really appreciated that, but it was neat being able to thread all those stories together, because that was what people loved about Resistance so much, was how much the stories touched on each other.
This ties in to the previous anthology, but you don't have to read that for this to make sense.
Right.
It's very hard to make everything stand alone.
Yeah. Knowing
You
Freehold.
kind of highlight something there too, though. One thing about Resistance, and one thing that what we enjoyed about writing one of the frame stories was getting to use everybody's characters that they came up with.
That was fun.
That was a lot of fun. Like getting to do that with all of y'all's stories, everybody who was in the last one, and Mike with that's what made that project so much fun. It's getting to use different characters for different purposes, and we even do it again in Defiance in our own stories a little bit too. So, I mean, Jaime, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was so much fun to get to do that, and hopefully we did everybody justice.
And like Justin was saying, we're starting to develop a bit of continuity now, even between the two anthologies, right? Like these are stories. They're not big picture stuff, but everybody's the hero of their own story, and so everybody's getting their own little sliver of attention as these anthology stories tie together. It's pretty rad.
What was next?
You with Bidding.
Bidding War.
A bidding war, yes. Yeah, and this is one I'd started for the previous anthology, and a combination of time and I was overloaded. But there's a reference in an intel report that Chris's character had in the previous one, where the uniforms they're finding among the rebels include Ripple Creek Security, which is one of their primary contractors, and that's bad. So the summary here is Ripple Creek's got multiple offices, but they've got one on Grania, and they run operations out of there for personal protection details, perimeter defense and security for operations. They're looking for contracts, and getting out system is suddenly very expensive and very complicated. Nobody has any money in system except for the UN. And you really don't want to take jobs for the invaders against your neighbors. I mean, mercenaries have flexible loyalty depending on who's paying, but that's kind of a shitting in your own pool kind of thing. Yeah,
it's gonna get personal.
Yeah, so they're looking for contracts and coming up short, and that's not even enough money to get a third-rate team from one of our fourth-rate competitors. It's like, what are they kidding? And but it does turn that there's a couple of Freehold-based billionaires who have an extensive kidnapping list for UN bureaucrats, because the soldiers are just there doing their job. The bureaucrats are the ones you want to go after. So they start taking out contracts to acquire bureaucrats and deliver them to the Professional Duelists Association, which might as well be called the Assassins Guild. That's basically what they are. And I was able to redshirt a couple of people in exchange for helping a friend who needed some support after her husband died suddenly, and was able to get lots of car chase in there. It's hard to write a car chase, but it's satisfying when you get one that works. And I'm proud of pointing out we're in Drive It Like Who Stole It, which we did. And the driver says, in accordance with all laws and regulations. Because if you stole it, that's how you drive it. You don't want the cops to notice you.
Don't catch their attention.
Yeah.
It reminded me of a Guy Ritchie movie, actually, the way you set it up. That was
okay.
No kidding, right?
I was waiting for Jason Statham to show up.
Okay. I don't watch many movies, but I could see that. Okay, yeah. That wasn't.
Yeah, especially with the way he kind of has that Cockney slang or whatever it is that he uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that back home we just call it a jive, but that's exactly what got going.
All right, who was next?
William.
That'd be me. So I've got to say this. When I started reading Freehold, I didn't know who Mike was. I'd met him at Dragon Con working for a former employer. I'd met Mike, and somebody was like, hey, Mike writes this. And I was like, okay. So I read it, and I was like, this shit's good. And then Laurel and I invited Mike and Jessica into Fantastic Hope, and they produced a fantastic story for that. So, and we were right in the middle of editing that Mike sends this email, and he's like, hey, do you want to play in Freehold? And I was like, yes. So, and I was racking my brain, and I was I read Defiance multiple times. I read Freehold. I reread Angel Eyes, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to write, because I'd served in the military. I was in Iraq as an MP. I was a drill sergeant. I was a Black Hawk pilot, and none of it really felt like it fit in Freehold. And then I started going back over the martial arts lessons that I've learned with history and things like that. So I studied Sealot, and Sealot came out of the Malay Peninsula, which they're primarily oral history. And one of the tribes that was one of the leading revolutionaries and rebels against the British and the Dutch was a tribe called the Boogies. And they, the mythology behind them was that they practiced black magic. They could make people disappear, and they did. They made British soldiers disappear in the middle of the night. They'd wipe out entire patrols that would go out and leave one guy alive, but no sign of how anyone disappeared. Or they'd take one person with no blood left, and he'd just disappear in the middle of the night. So I took that, and then I took Silat and Filipino martial arts and said, okay, how can I put this in a story? And I asked Mike, I was like, so has anything been done with the archipelago that's out in the ocean that was a throwaway line in Freehold? And I was like, I'm going to play here. And Mike said, no. I said, okay, so here's my pitch. And I went, okay, they're Filipino and Malay. So Catholic.
And I said, no one had played there, but go ahead.
Yeah.
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 So I said, okay, so Malay, Filipino, so they're Catholic and Muslim. And actually, one of the first scenes in Boogie's Men is actually lifted straight from the oral history of the Malay rebellion against the British. And it's the dance scene where they're dancing and then the swords come out and the invaders die, which was, for me, was really cool that I got to bring the culture and the history that I've been learning about for so long and put it on a page and do it justice. And actually, Mike made a comment to me. He was like, I was going to write part of this, and you kind of started it forward, because I talked about how people had left Earth from Malaysia and Indonesia and moved to Grania. So it was really cool for me to get to see it from an insurgent's point of view, because I'd had to think about it being an MP, but I'd never put myself into that mindset. So it was a lot of fun playing in the world. I'm so happy with how the story came out. I don't think Mike has any complaints.
It was neat to have, because it's common especially in sci-fi TV, there is one culture. There's a monoculture for a planet or a system or a race, and that's not reality. I mean, even just across the U.S., there's dozens of cultures. In fact, I've got new neighbors in the industrial space next to me, and they're from Chicago, but their first language is Spanish. Only there's English mixed in there. So it's almost a pidgin when they're communicating. But they're Spanish speakers, but they are American. They're very American. And this was more of a case of that. The people from the more tropical areas went to the more tropical climes. So we've covered in the last couple of anthologies that there's some fundamentalist Christians, there's pseudo pagans, there's the Malay, Thai, Filipino elements that came in early on. There's bunches of different cultures on the planet, and then each of the habitats has its own culture as well. And it's neat to have that kind of expansion.
Well, and looking at the cultures and especially the blend of cultures that happens in Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and I actually set like where the primary tribes are. So reference the southern tribes, which are all Muslim, which is how it's set in the Philippines. You've got
right.
The Mindanao region, which is all Muslim, and right along that border, there's some contention, but there's also some mixing and things like that, which I think I addressed really well with the main character being a Catholic, and him letting his teammates have their prayer time and stepping out and respecting that while he's saying his own prayer. So it was important for me to show that, because I'll be honest, I came home from Iraq with a really poor view of Islam. And then, as I spent more time in the military and dealing with other businesses and things like that, I met some Muslims that weren't what I dealt with in Iraq. So showing that there are decent ones was really important.
And of course, Islam varies, whether it's Arabia,
Yes.
Philippines. A friend of mine's from Indonesia, and she drinks beer, eats pork. There's nothing particularly observant about her. I've got friends in Pakistan, and they're different again. Bangladesh, they're all, their own cultures permeated the religion. So you again, it's not a monodot. Who was next?
They Also Serve by Michael Z. Williamson.
Oh yes, yeah, and this is one. This was based on when I was doing aggressor forces stuff for my unit on active duty. We'd aggress ourselves, we'd aggress other units, we'd do stuff with the Army Guard, and infiltrating perimeters. And it's amazing, the classic, if you have a hard hat, a clipboard, and a frown, no one wants to talk to you, and you can go just about anywhere. You just sort of look at them while you're making a check mark and frowning, and oh no, hey, don't, might have to answer questions. And the key plot point here is that the UN is spreading out these convoys to occupy, and that's a necessary function and a time-consuming function. You're basically stepping stones as you go. You set up a small rendezvous point. It becomes a lager. It becomes a contingency base, a fire base, an operating base. You build them up as you go, but it takes a long time and a lot of resources to build your footprint. And this is one of the things military engineers train for, is both to do it and to stop it. And with the multicultural UN, each of these elements has their own uniforms. And this is when the U.S. started getting a different uniform for every branch of service. I was just face palming. It was like, the Marines said, "Well, we want a distinctive camouflage." Okay, so I want you to say those two words again, and think about what you just said.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the Army got a new one because the Army owned BDUs. That meant the naval ground elements and the Air Force had to get new uniforms, and on and on. It's just. And but we'd have stuff like that. We would wear enemy uniforms when we were doing OPFOR, and you would think that if you're wearing the opposite uniform, someone would go, "Well, that's a bad guy. He shouldn't be here." But no, it depends on how you approach. People will let you walk right through a perimeter. We even had badges made up for the units. We had VIP, instructor, evaluator, press. And press and VIPs had to be escorted by an instructor and evaluator. And we made up badges that said aggressor. It flat right on the badge, 3 by 5, bad guy. And we'd walk in dressed in the enemy uniform with loaded weapons, and no one would stop us. So I threw that in there. This is a former soldier who's doing reconnaissance and sending the information into Beth, the combination intel network and AI that's doing all the compiling for the Freehold forces. And he asks his assistant, he says, how many uniforms were in that last convoy? Like, 17, wasn't it? So who'd notice number 18? You're kidding. So they hijack a convoy just by walking in and starting a fight. And, it's not that simple, but it got very ugly very quickly. But it's like, yeah, you can actually just, act firm, act like you've got a purpose, and people will largely not question you while you do all kinds of. Sorry?
Very dirty.
Oh, yeah. But it wasn't original to the Dirty Dozen. I mean, it's been done for centuries. I mean, it's the classic Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Come on in. Yeah.
You ever think the satire gets lost on some people reading these stories?
Well, I was writing. Which one was it? No, it was When Diplomacy Fails, the last of the Ripple Creek trilogy. Although I'm doing a fourth one eventually. And there's mild satire all through that. And I was watching the Occupy protests and going, satire's dead. And since then, it's gotten worse. It's like there is no way to write satire anymore. The evening news it should be satire, but it's not. It's like, who was next?
Well, Justin had the next story for replacements. Did you have one to say, Justin?
Which we talked about, yes.
In which case it goes on to Semper Malevolum by Holmesy and Cordova.
Yeah, and they sent me this saying, we just threw this out and it's not really very good. And I go, no, this is awesome. Go ahead, guys.
You first, Jason. You started.
Okay. Well, what? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, just make sure. So how it started was I had this vision in my head of remember the movie Grumpy Old Men? Literally, I stuck those two old bastards on Grania, and I was like, all right, they're neighbors, they hate each other, but now the UN is invading their home. What are they going to do about it? And they're both retired snipers with the Freehold military force. They hate each other. Okay, let me rephrase that. The lead character hates the other one with a passion. The other one just dislikes him because he's married his sister. So it's
Wait,
it was basically like that. And then when I was writing, I was like, I need something else in it. And I contacted John. I was like, hey, John, you want to write a story together? And he's like, sure. What do you got? And I was like, well, I got this idea. And then it literally turned into a game of one-upmanship between my snipers and his counter sniper. And we were just trying to outdo each other the whole way through the story. And we wrote it in about 2 days. And I was like, well, that was fun. Let's give it to Mike, see what he says.
And I didn't say anything for a while because I was finishing up that anthology, and then we got to work on this. And I look at it and go, no, this is really cool.
Yeah, it was actually a lot of fun to write because what would happen was Jason would write a scene, and then he would email it to me, and then I would write the response scene from the other point of view. And my character is one of those guys who just thinks that war is a big, not a game, but it's the most dangerous game, and he enjoys the sniper part of things because no matter how bad forces get, there's always going to be somebody in there who's a competent sociopath who just likes to hunt for the game. And we wrote it really quickly, like you said, like 2 days, I think 2 or 3 days, Jason.
Yeah.
And it was kind of cool to think, all right, well, this is what I see happening. I think the initial one was your guys shoot one of the UN troops and kill her, and then my guy's standing there and in the formation, and he sees somebody get killed, and everybody else around him is panicking, running around, and he's just looking up to the hills, going, "Yeah, okay, all right, it's on." So it was really cool to have that experience to just go back and forth like that, and to write a really good story. And when Mike said, "Hey, we'll use it in the next one," I was like, "All right, well, we kind of wrote it as a joke, but sure, whatever, that's cool." So
yeah, I think we wrote it because at the time Mike wasn't sure if he was going to get all the stories turned in time. We're like, well, we'll just throw this together and throw it into him. He can keep it in his back pocket if he needs it.
Yeah, and I got to use one of my favorite characters from my books, brought forward much further in time, but he's one of the fan favorites. So people got to see my characters in a different venue, so to speak. So it was a lot of fun.
I liked how the junior enlisted take turns being the political briefer for the day to make sure they're properly inculcated, and those are the ones the snipers are knocking off. And,
and then the two old guys start arguing over whether it was a headshot or a neck shot, or they meant to do that, or something like that, or I could have made that shot. You suck.
Wait! If he backs up, I'll have another meter, and I'll beat your record.
Basically.
I was almost waiting for the. I want you to shoot him in the balls and her in the head. All right, well, give me about 5 seconds. I can do it with one bullet.
And the fact that the guy was more afraid of going back to face his wife and tell her that her brother was dead or something. Not that he died or whatever. I'm not going to give it away, but he was more afraid of facing his wife than he was of facing another sniper. So that was, I think, pretty funny too. So
it depends on the wife.
He's got his priorities in order.
Yeah. What was after that?
Fire in the Deep, Angel on.
There we go. Doc and
Chris.
And Chris. Yeah, I asked them to do this. We had there was a real world incident, and I'm going, that would translate beautifully to this with some additional expansion. And it's lengthy, it's detailed, it's very gritty. Go ahead.
Hey Phil, you want to lead off?
Yeah. So the very, very first draft of this was really kind of a continuation of what happened to the Irish peacekeepers that were getting massacred at the end of my story in the last anthology. And so I had this British female medic, who was taking care of these Irish peacekeepers, and the story changed quite a bit through the editing process. So now it's this completely different group, but you still see some kind of the throwbacks to they're still talking about Russian Spetsnaz, who are mercenaries from like another from the Russian planet.
Novaya Russia.
Yeah, the really seriously bad people who come in and do really, really seriously bad things to freeholders. And so, there aren't very many Russians being taken prisoner. So you have that bad group who's off being massacred. But in the course of the story, you have these remnants of this company as they're trying to exfiltrate an area, and they end up taking one of the local leaders along with them because Molly's like, hey, he's wounded, got to treat him. That's part of the code of being a medic. You know, we don't really see a uniform on the battlefield. And so they're dragging this guy along with the way. And so we're flashing back and forth between, you know, my medic going off and doing, you know, the ground stuff, and Chris's like operations center, you know, going at first not like they don't want to have anything to do with this, and then further along, like they're actually ordered into, you know, rescuing this group, which is how you get the Russian pilot involved, and how you go back onto the ground, and you know they get this group off the ground into a medevac. The medevac flight gets shot down, and they end up in, you know, having to trek across the jungle, and that's where we bring in dire coyotes or
dire yotes. Yeah,
yeah. So a lot of references sort of to aliens in there, in terms of like the dire yotes can climb trees. They will attack from above as well as from the tree line or other stuff. So a lot of like really very nasty things happen to this group along their way, try to exfiltrate this area. Chris, you want to take the Operations Center half?
Sure. So what I wanted to do from that was added a bit of a different perspective. You know, war stories and military science fiction does tend to be very ground centric, so I figured an opportunity to inject a little bit of a more airman perspective, especially with, you know, upper echelons of warfare too. You know, I wanted to remind people when I was writing those scenes was Grania is a system-wide war, you know, and more so it's a planet-wide war. So why not show a little bit of what that looks like, you know, what that could look like. So that's where that aspect came in. And it's a major campaign. It's a huge campaign. So you're going to have phases. You're going to have different named operations going on across the whole breadth of it. You're going to have offensives, counteroffensives. You're going to have, you know, things that look like coin right next to things that look like counterterrorism that look right next to conventional warfare, right? And so this was an opportunity to like show all of that kind of in the same place. You know, we had to change up the direction a bit. I think at least, well, you know what? They're not the only Irish peacekeepers on the planet. These aren't the only Russians on the planet. And it might be part of something bigger involving all of them. So being able then to also jump back and forth, Mike mentioned the grittiness, and, you know, Doc mentioned the awesome action scenes that he wrote, and the great ground's eye view characters that he had in those British peacekeepers, especially Molly, to just kind of flip the perspective on the reader right quick and show them what war looks like on the other side of the sensor feed, or what it looks like on the other side of the cockpit. So doing that, and also the contrast just really throws you, right? Like 1 minute you're sitting there doing this kind of desk jockey C2 battle management stuff, and then boom, you know, you're getting the guy next to you got blown in half, or in the case of the dire yotes, you know, cut in half right in front of you. And you know, Doc is I think being too modest, you know, with the quality of the action scenes that he wrote. I mean, the throwbacks, they're good throwbacks too, right? They're good throwbacks that remind you of the best action scenes in Aliens, and I think Predator too. That comes out great.
Yeah, very
the
much.
operational piece, it was meant to show how would you actually put something this complicated together without being boring, you know. And so that's where a lot of that political intrigue came in. That's where a lot of the personalities came in. But, you know, there was one character who was actually based on a war college instructor of mine who passed away suddenly not too long ago. So there was an opportunity to do some tribute there to that. But, you know, it was fun to play with Commonwealth-based characters and not too many Americans. And then, you know, I thought tying it back together towards at the end, you know, where we kind of show the aftermath of that engagement, of that entire operation, was kind of a really good, really kind of a poignant way to end it.
Yeah. Well, and the other side of this was, you know, again with the animal life, you know, Mike constantly refers to Grania as, you know, you see the civilization on that planet, but that planet isn't all that civilized. If you think about some of the wildlife on there that frequently can show up, like the rippers or whatnot. So I really wanted to kind of incorporate that into the story, because it is very much man versus wild when all of your technology has failed you and you could still be eaten. You're lower down on the food chain than some of the other things that are out there.
When I created the universe, that aspect there was based on when I lived in Canada, because I lived in an area with several million people, but you got an hour north and it was desolate nothing. Once you're out of the southern peninsula there, Canada gets more and more sparse. At the time when I lived there, 90% of the population lived within 100 miles of the U.S. border, and I think it's probably about the same now.
Yeah, it doesn't change much.
Yeah, so you can drive just a few miles and you're in the wilderness. And here I'm less than 40 minutes from downtown Indianapolis. We just had a fox the size of a golden retriever eating our chickens. There's deer out here. There's pheasants, turkeys. There's plenty of wildlife, and I can see the city glow easily. So with the habitation on Grania, they've got several urban areas they started spreading out from, but in between is huge thousands of miles of nothing, and there's not even roads for most of it. So once you get out, it's the planet hasn't really noticed the influx of people yet. And,
well, and I'll say getting to play with the fauna of Grania was really cool, because I was like, okay, so, and actually I had to do a lot of work with Mike for my story, because I was like, okay, there's not going to be the same on these islands that there are on the mainland. So and I know I put names of animals in there, and then Mike made it more Grania. So, and Mike's right, you've got to put the wildlife into the story to make it come alive, just because of the habitat of the planet. And I think that's one of the things that makes Freehold so amazing, because Mike, you went in and you took it down to the flora and the fauna and explained how it impacts the ecosystem and the civilization. So that was
right. And then when we did Forged in Blood, Peter Grant did a story of the initial pioneer parties landing and getting organized. And he grew up in South Africa, so he has experience with megafauna firsthand. And he went into the rippers and slashers and a couple of other animals. And so all of this is built into the grit that people are using now for these stories.
Some of my favorite critters from that story are the neurotoxic river otters that just they're like cute little piranhas that go around and just skeletonize people.
Yeah. If you read Peter Hathaway Capstick's books, he was a stockbroker in New Jersey. He grew up hunting in rural New Jersey, became a stockbroker, decided he hated it, and became a professional hunter, first in South America, then in Africa. And you read his books and you realize there is nothing on that continent that won't turn you into protein one way or another, if not for itself, then for something else. The insects will kill you. You put when you go to bed at night, you keep a pair of cartridges bullet down in the muzzle of your rifle, so that the spiders don't lay egg sacs that will cause a barrel explosion. When my mother was in Rhodesia, when it was insect season, they had pans of kerosene under the feet of the bed to stop the ants from climbing up the bed and leaving you covered with welts, at least, if not, devouring your flesh. So,
good times.
Yeah. Doc particularly has really grown as a writer. His last story was really good. This one was even better. I did have to coach him one thing, that you can't nurture a casualty partway through the story and then swap casualties. The reader gets attached to the character, and you want them to keep that attachment the whole way through the story, because it just
that was my
keeps
fault.
It's a learning experience, but it keeps the tension the whole way through, that they're trying to keep this one guy alive, and several other people alive, and people are dying left and right, and there's this this helpless guy on a stretcher, and is he going to make it? Yeah. With with wildlife and enemy attacks and misplaced blue on blue, and then they come to a temporary ceasefire, and the UN command, the Freehold commander says, "Now you understand, we don't control all of these groups. Some of them don't like us either. So whether or not they're going to play is entirely up to them."
Now, that was one addition that I think that adds to the whole thing as well, is that even because no insurgency is like that universal.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was thinking about that, just thinking about from present day Syria, or especially Balkans back in the early 90s. I mean, that was a big thing that stuck out. And then also the insurgents, right? Because you had the Provos, you had the real Irish Republican Army, and about 5-6 different other groups. And, none of them necessarily liked each other, and not all of them would answer to Sean Fine when the time came, for the ceasefire even. So it just seemed like a natural, nice, real world kind of, hey, this happens. This no kidding happens, man. It could happen there too.
The Judean People's Front. The People's Front of Judea, the Popular Front.
We actually did that, though, this one. We actually had you spoke of, fundamentalist Christians. We threw a kibbutz in there because why the hell not?
Right, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And everyone's got their own goals here.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun to write.
Yeah. And then I think it had ended there, and I pulled out one story that I realized there's a gap here. There's a story that had been published elsewhere but had not been put in any of my collections for this. And that was The Price, which another one I'd written early on, and I tried basically to turn a long short story, a novella or novelette, into, I was trying to put an entire universe of background in there, and that doesn't work. And I was at Dragon Con, and John Ringo comes to me and says, "I need a story for an anthology." It's like, all right, let me think about it. And that was the Citizens, all the authors were veterans. And I say, "I think I've got this one." And he agreed it sounded workable. I gutted it about 2/3 and rewrote it. And it worked for that, and it capstones this. And so what's repeatedly referenced in all of the stories is that right at the end, there is this massive counterattack with, and a lot of it is very dangerous, and a lot of it is flat out suicidal. But it's like, we've got to take out all these targets. We have to take them all out in this time frame. If you can take one out, here's the list, do it. And a lot of these people don't expect to survive. A lot of them don't, although some of them will, do come out again afterward. And it's a ship crew. It's a recon ship crew, and they have the opportunity to take out a couple of stations and an enemy command ship, and they're not going to survive. But they know this is going to be pivotal to the war. And I've already been getting fan mail on it going, God, that was hard to read. Like, well, not everyone survives. That's the nature of it. And so I had them stick that in there at the end, and it caps everything off. It's like this, regardless of what happens, this is not without massive sacrifice on both sides. And there's lots of, this one had the whole book had a lot more lightheartedness than the previous anthology, but there's also a lot of grit and dirt in it. And you got snipers in a contest with each other. You've got mercenaries who just want a paycheck. You've got hey, how can we screw with these guys on the radio? And then it's so somebody's got to put this bomb right there. And that wraps it up. That concludes the anthology, and very pleased with everything everyone turned in. Our feedback so far has been phenomenal, and it was a great effort. I appreciate everybody's input. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Amen.
It says it.
Yeah.